Hi everyone, welcome to this video on the muscle system. We're making this video as a makeup for our lab number 2, and we are including the muscles of the head, the muscles of the neck, the posterior and anterior torso. So let's begin with the first muscles. The first muscle that we're going to be discussing here and identifying is this muscle that we have over there directly on our shoulder. It's called the deltoid muscle. Very close to it, we have this triangular shaped muscle, which is called the pectoralis major. Going alongside the medial line of our body, we have this big flat muscle called the rectus abdominis. To the side of the body, to the more lateral side of the body, a little hard to see in this picture, we have the external oblique. Directly deep to the external oblique, we have the internal oblique. That muscle that we have over there. Next muscle, this serrated muscle that we have in there, so we'll draw a couple of lines to identify it a little bit better, is called the serratus anterior. And deep to the pectoralis major, we have this other muscle called the pectoralis minor. These are the muscles that we're going to be using for the anterior side of the torso. Now, looking at the back, the first evident muscle that we have in here is this very big muscle over there that starts at the base of the neck, stretching all the way down to the middle of our back, alongside the middle line of our back. The muscle is called the trapezius. Deep to the trapezius, this other important muscle with the shape of a rhomboid, it's called the rhomboid muscle. The infraspinatus, it's a muscle that goes directly inferior to the line, to the spine of the scapula. So we have it right there, a little bit hard to see in the model, the infraspinatus. Inferior to the infraspinatus, we have the teres major. And then one last muscle here on the back, very big flat muscle also, the latissimus dorsi. The latissimus dorsi. These are the muscles that are going to be included for the anterior and posterior torso. Now let's move to the muscles of the face. Let's move to the muscles of the face. Some of the muscles of the face are very easy to remember because they follow the names of the bones of the skull. So let's begin with the frontalis. Let's begin with the frontalis, which is directly on top. Is directly on top to the frontal bone of the skull. Following that line, the lateral side of the head, we have the temporalis muscle directly on top the temporal bone. Now our skull, here we have two views of that muscle. And the third one, which is very hard to see in the pictures that we have, but directly posterior to our head is the occipitalis, which is directly on top the occipital bone of our skull. Now the round muscles of the face, we have the ocularis, the orbicularis oculi, is a round muscle that covers our eyes, and also orbicularis oris, which is a round muscle that covers surrounds our mouth. Now we have the zygomatic major, is this muscle that we have right here, and it starts in the zygomatic bone of our skull, and it ends up in the orbicularis oris, very close to the zygomatic major, this bone that we have, muscle that we have right over here. We have the masseter, it's this squared muscle that we have there connecting to the posterior side of our jaw. A deep muscle, the buccinator, would be located in an area around there. Sometimes very hard to see in the muscles because it's a very, very deep muscle. And finally, what we have, it's the muscle with the longest name of all, the sternocleidomastoid, which is this bone with this muscle that I have around here, that muscle that stretches all the way over there. Now let's have a view of isolated muscles of the head and the neck. It's a little bit easier for us to identify these muscles if we can just see the muscle attached to the bones by themselves. So let's begin with the frontalis. The frontalis muscle, as we can see it here in our forehead. The orbicularis oculi, the round muscle around our eye. The temporalis, directly on top of the temporal bone, to the lateral side of our skull. Occipitalis, this one is the one that we couldn't see in the pictures that we had before, very small muscle in the occipital region of our head. Now the masseter, here we have the masseter attached to the lower side of our jaw. The sternocleidomastoid, the muscle, one of the muscles with the longest name that we have over there. And here we can see it all along, and why it's called the sternocleidomastoid. It has an origin in the mastoid process of our skull, and then it has the insertion points in the clavicle and the sternum. The trapezius, very big muscle in the middle of our back. It kind of looks like a little bit of a diamond. And then we have that platysma, normally not shown in the models that we have. It covers the deeper muscles of our neck. Moving along, we have the isolated muscles of the anterior torso. The pectoralis major, you can see the muscle being isolated over here, the pectoralis major. Pectoralis minor, deep to the pectoralis major. You can see the 3 subunits of that pectoralis muscle. The serratus anterior, we can see all of the origin points here in the ribs, all of them there in the ribs. It's a subunit of muscles that we have over there. The rectus abdominis, going along the medial line of our body. This is our abs. The internal oblique, deep to the external oblique, odd-shaped muscle. And the external oblique and the attachment points here in the ribs and all over this side to the fascia, going to the medial side of our body. Now let's continue with the isolated muscles of the posterior torso. That kind of hard to see muscle that we had there before, the infraspinatus. Here we can see how this is the spine process of the scapula, and the muscle is directly below it. And we have here the insertion point that is to the humerus, and the origin which is in the infraspinous fossa of the scapula. So it starts at the scapula, and then later on it's attached, its insertion point, to the humerus. Here we have the teres major, also has an origin point here in the scapula, and then it moves attached to the humerus also there. This is a very small muscle, helps us with the movement of our arms. The latissimus dorsi, big triangular muscle there, which has an origin point also in the humerus, and an insertion point in the humerus, and an origin here in the middle of our spine. The muscles that have the rhomboid shape, here we can see them there, the rhomboid muscle. And finally what we have is the serratus muscle, the serrator posterior, and we have the inferior and the superior muscles. Up there we can see the superior serratus muscles, and directly inferior to that, of course, the inferior posterior serratus muscle. And that is all the isolated muscles that we're going to be covering for the head, the neck, the anterior and posterior torso. Thank you for your attention.